Olivia Carter's lifeless body was discovered on the marble floor of a luxury Parisian apartment on November 19, 2023, at 8:32 in the morning by paramedics responding to Ethan Cole's frantic emergency call, claiming his wife had accidentally fallen down the stairs during an argument about canceling their scheduled content shoot. But the forensic evidence would later reveal a pattern of injuries, inconsistent with a simple fall and consistent with sustained physical assault, followed by a fatal impact that occurred while Ethan's camera was still recording everything in horrifying detail on a memory card he had desperately tried to destroy before police arrived. The woman who had enchanted 5 million social media followers with her seemingly perfect love story, her radiant smile in every uploaded video, and her fairy tale wedding ceremony filmed against the Eiffel Tower backdrop, had been living a nightmare that contradicted every carefully curated frame her husband posted, to maintain the profitable illusion that their relationship represented aspirational romance rather than systematic control, manipulation, and escalating violence hidden behind perfectly edited content designed to generate maximum engagement and sponsorship revenue. The investigation that would eventually expose Ethan Cole as something far darker than the charismatic lifestyle influencer millions trusted and admired began with routine questions about the circumstances of Olivia's death, but quickly evolved into a comprehensive examination of digital evidence, including deleted footage, private messages, and metadata that revealed the disturbing reality of their relationship behind the romantic montages and sponsored couple content that had generated millions in advertising revenue while concealing systematic abuse that Olivia had been too afraid to disclose publicly. Detective Jean-Luc Moreau of the Paris Police Prefecture recognized immediately that something was fundamentally wrong with Ethan's tearful explanation of accidental death, noting inconsistencies in his timeline, the defensive wounds on Olivia's arms, and the suspicious fact that Ethan had been editing video footage on his laptop rather than calling for help during the critical minutes when medical intervention might have saved his wife's life if she had truly been the victim of an accident rather than deliberate violence. The relationship between Olivia Carter and Ethan Cole had begun 2 years earlier, in the spring of 2021, when Olivia was completing her fashion design studies at a prestigious program in Paris, pursuing her dreams of building a career in the fashion industry while also documenting her European adventures on a small personal Instagram account that had attracted modest following through her genuine enthusiasm and creative aesthetic. Since Ethan had noticed her at a creator networking event in Le Marais, immediately recognizing that her authentic charm and photogenic presence could enhance his content and expand his audience demographics by appealing to viewers interested in romance and relationship content that consistently generated higher engagement rates than his previous solo travel vlogs had achieved, despite years of consistent uploading and optimization strategies. The courtship that Ethan documented exhaustively for his channel appeared spontaneous and romantic to viewers who watched their relationship develop through carefully edited vlogs that showed sunset picnics along the Seine, surprise gifts, and intimate conversations about their shared dreams. But Olivia would later confide to her best friend Sophie that Ethan had been calculating and strategic from their first conversation, immediately asking about her social media following and suggesting collaboration opportunities before expressing personal romantic interest that seemed secondary to his professional assessment of how her presence might benefit his brand and revenue streams. The early warning signs that Sophie noticed included Ethan's obsession with filming everything, his irritation when Olivia was not camera ready, and his tendency to reshoot conversations multiple times until they achieved the emotional authenticity he needed for maximum viewer engagement, despite the artificial circumstances of staged moments presented as spontaneous interactions. The marriage proposal that Ethan orchestrated 6 months into their relationship was captured by multiple hidden cameras and a drone, broadcast to his millions of followers as the ultimate romantic gesture, complete with musicians, elaborate floral arrangements, and Olivia's tearful acceptance that seemed genuine to viewers who had no awareness that Ethan had pressured her for weeks about the timing being perfect for channel growth and that he had threatened to end their relationship if she was not ready to commit in ways that would generate the viral engagement necessary to secure the brand partnerships he had been negotiating. The elaborate Paris wedding ceremony that followed 3 months later in August 2021 was sponsored by luxury brands and documented across multiple platforms, generating hundreds of thousands in direct revenue, while also establishing Ethan and Olivia as premier couple content creators, whose seemingly perfect relationship became aspirational content that millions followed obsessively, while remaining completely unaware of the psychological manipulation and control that defined their private interactions. The transformation in Ethan's behavior following their marriage was immediate and disturbing, according to Sophie's later testimony, with the charismatic romantic persona he had maintained during courtship replaced by demanding criticism, constant monitoring of Olivia's activities and communications, and explosive anger when content performance metrics did not meet his expectations, or when Olivia expressed fatigue with the exhausting schedule of daily vlogs, sponsored content, and carefully staged relationship moments that left no room for genuine privacy or authentic emotional connection. The isolation that Ethan systematically imposed on Olivia included gradually restricting her contact with Sophie and other friends he deemed potentially negative influences, controlling her finances by insisting that all sponsorship payments go through his business accounts, and monitoring her phone and computer usage, while claiming these measures were necessary for protecting their brand and preventing leaks of private information that could damage their carefully constructed public image. The physical violence that would eventually escalate to Olivia's death began with seemingly minor incidents that Ethan dismissed as accidents or justified as responses to Olivia's perceived failures to maintain the perfection their audience expected, including grabbing her arm forcefully during arguments about content planning, pushing her during disagreements about their schedule, and once slapping her face when she refused to film a sponsored segment because she was exhausted and emotionally depleted from weeks of continuous content creation without breaks that normal employment relationships would have required. The psychological abuse was even more comprehensive and devastating, including constant criticism of Olivia's appearance and performance, threats to destroy her reputation by posting unflattering footage or creating narratives about her being difficult to work with, and gaslighting tactics where Ethan would deny his own violent behavior or claim Olivia was misremembering incidents in ways that made her question her own perceptions and reality. The digital evidence that investigators would eventually recover from Ethan's devices revealed the true extent of his calculated manipulation, including raw, unedited footage showing him screaming at Olivia between takes of content that appeared loving and supportive in final uploads, text messages threatening to ruin her career if she left him, and search history, indicating he had been researching how to explain injuries and control narratives around domestic incidents that might attract unwanted attention. The deleted video files from the morning of Olivia's death would prove to be the most damning evidence, showing an argument that escalated from verbal abuse to physical violence and culminating in Ethan's fatal assault, while his camera continued recording everything that his millions of followers would never see because it contradicted the carefully constructed image that had made him wealthy and famous, while concealing the monster he became when cameras were supposedly turned off, though he compulsively documented everything, including his own crimes. The emergency call that brought paramedics and police to the luxury apartment Ethan and Olivia shared in the 16th arrondissement was placed at 8:17 on that November morning, with Ethan's voice exhibiting theatrical panic that experienced emergency responders immediately recognized as potentially performative rather than the genuine distress typically displayed by individuals who had just discovered their spouse seriously injured or deceased. The recording of the call would later become crucial evidence, as forensic audio analysts documented that Ethan's breathing patterns, speech cadence, and emotional presentation were inconsistent with authentic shock, and instead suggested someone performing grief rather than experiencing it, particularly during moments when he forgot to maintain his distressed tone while providing address information and answering dispatcher questions about the circumstances of Olivia's injuries. The crime scene that Detective Jean-Luc Moreau encountered upon arrival contradicted Ethan's explanation of a tragic accident resulting from Olivia losing her balance during an argument and falling down the interior staircase connecting their split-level apartment. The position of Olivia's body at the base of the marble stairs showed impact patterns inconsistent with a fall, while the defensive wounds on her forearms suggested she had attempted to protect herself from blows rather than simply falling, and the specific nature of the fatal head trauma indicated a focused impact against the marble floor that forensic analysis would later determine resulted from her head being forcibly driven into the surface, rather than striking it through momentum from a fall downstairs that were not particularly steep or extensive. The initial interview with Ethan in the apartment's living room revealed immediate inconsistencies that triggered Moreau's investigative instincts, honed through decades of distinguishing genuine accidents from crimes staged to appear accidental. Ethan claimed they had been arguing about canceling their scheduled morning vlog because Olivia was tired and he had become frustrated about losing content opportunities and potential revenue, but he could not explain specific details about the argument's progression or provide coherent timeline for events between the start of their disagreement and his discovery of Olivia at the bottom of the stairs, where he claimed she had fallen after turning away from him during their heated discussion about professional obligations versus personal needs. The forensic examination of Ethan's laptop revealed that he had been actively editing video files during the critical period between Olivia's fatal injuries and his emergency call, suggesting that rather than immediately seeking help when his wife was dying, he had prioritized reviewing and deleting footage that might incriminate him in her death. The digital forensics team discovered that Ethan had permanently deleted approximately 47 minutes of video recorded that morning, though sophisticated data recovery techniques eventually retrieved fragmented portions of this deleted content that would prove devastating to his claims of accidental death by showing the actual progression of events from verbal argument to physical assault to fatal violence. While Ethan's camera continued recording everything from its position on a tripod he had apparently forgotten, was still capturing footage during his loss of control. The investigation into Ethan's background revealed a pattern of controlling behavior and emotional manipulation in previous relationships, with 3 former girlfriends providing statements about his obsession with documentation, his volatile temper when they failed to meet his expectations for social media presentation, and his threats to damage their reputations through selective editing and narrative manipulation if they disclosed unflattering information about him or their relationships. These ex-girlfriends described feeling trapped by Ethan's ability to control how they appeared online and his threats to use his massive platform to destroy their credibility if they challenged his version of events, creating dynamics where Ethan wielded his social media influence as a weapon to ensure silence and compliance from women who recognized that contradicting someone with millions of loyal followers would result in harassment and reputational damage that could devastate their personal and professional lives. The examination of Olivia's personal devices revealed disturbing evidence of systematic monitoring and control, with tracking software on her phone that allowed Ethan to monitor her location and communications, browsing history showing her research into domestic violence resources and how to safely leave abusive relationships, and draft messages never sent to friends, describing the deterioration of her marriage and her fear of Ethan's increasingly volatile behavior and violent outbursts that she could not disclose publicly without risking the retaliation he had explicitly threatened. The most heartbreaking discovery was a video Olivia had secretly recorded on her phone 2 weeks before her death, speaking directly to camera in their bathroom while Ethan slept, describing her fear that he might eventually kill her and her hope that if anything happened to her, this recording would reveal the truth behind their supposedly perfect relationship and prevent Ethan from controlling the narrative around her death the way he controlled everything else in their lives. The interview with Sophie Martin, Olivia's closest friend from her university years, provided crucial context about the dramatic changes in Olivia's personality and circumstances following her marriage to Ethan. Sophie described how Olivia had gradually become isolated from her support network, how her spontaneous creativity had been replaced by anxious perfectionism driven by Ethan's constant criticism, and how the confident young woman who had arrived in Paris pursuing her dreams had been systematically diminished into someone who apologized constantly, seemed afraid to make decisions without Ethan's approval, and displayed classic signs of abuse that Sophie had tried to address multiple times, only to have Olivia defend Ethan and claim everything was fine, because she could not admit the truth without confronting the terrifying reality that she was trapped in a relationship with someone whose public persona bore no resemblance to the controlling monster he became in private moments. The forensic timeline reconstruction revealed that the fatal assault occurred between 7:43 and 7:58 that morning, based on digital metadata from Ethan's recording devices, blood spatter analysis, and the progression of injuries documented in autopsy findings. The recovered video fragments showed an argument beginning with Ethan's anger about Olivia's refusal to film their morning routine content, escalating through verbal abuse and threats, and culminating in physical violence, where Ethan grabbed Olivia's arms hard enough to leave the bruising documented in autopsy photographs before the final confrontation at the top of the stairs, where forensic evidence indicated he had forcibly driven her head into the marble floor with sufficient force to cause the fatal skull fracture and brain trauma that killed her within minutes, while Ethan apparently panicked and spent precious time reviewing footage rather than calling for help that might have saved her if her injuries had been slightly less severe. The examination of Ethan's social media accounts and business records revealed the extent to which his entire lifestyle depended on maintaining the illusion of a perfect relationship, with couple content generating over 70% of his channel revenue through sponsorships, advertising, and affiliate marketing that would immediately disappear if his audience discovered the truth about his treatment of Olivia. Financial documents showed Ethan earned between 40,000 and 60,000 euros monthly from their joint content, with projections indicating this revenue would only increase if they could maintain their posting schedule and continue expanding their audience, giving Ethan enormous financial motivation to preserve the relationship facade regardless of Olivia's well-being or her desperate desire to escape a marriage that had become a nightmare concealed behind perfectly filtered photographs and enthusiastically positive video content. The discovery of hidden camera footage from their apartment that even Olivia apparently did not know existed revealed Ethan's obsessive need to document and control every aspect of their lives, with multiple devices recording continuously in various rooms to capture potential content opportunities, and apparently also to monitor Olivia's behavior when she believed she had privacy. This footage provided additional evidence of the systematic abuse Olivia endured, showing Ethan berating her for minor imperfections in her appearance before filming, criticizing her performance after completing sponsored content segments, and making threats about what he would do to her reputation if she ever tried to leave him or reveal the truth about their relationship to anyone who might help her escape. The international media attention that began building within hours of Olivia's death initially favored Ethan's narrative of tragic accident, with millions of his loyal followers expressing sympathy and defending him against skeptics who questioned inconsistencies in his tearful video, explaining what had happened to his wife. The emotional statement Ethan posted to his channel 6 hours after Olivia's death was carefully crafted to generate maximum sympathy, while establishing his preferred narrative before investigators could develop alternative theories, showing him tearful and devastated, while describing Olivia's supposed fall and their final argument in ways that portrayed her as emotionally unstable and accident-prone, while positioning himself as a grieving husband rather than a violent perpetrator whose carefully constructed public image was about to be destroyed by evidence he had been unable to delete successfully. The formal arrest of Ethan Cole occurred 72 hours after Olivia's death, when forensic analysis of recovered video footage and medical evidence conclusively demonstrated that her injuries could not have resulted from the accidental fall Ethan had described in his emergency call and subsequent public statements. The charges initially filed included voluntary manslaughter, while investigators continued analyzing evidence that might support upgrading to murder charges if they could establish premeditation or demonstrate that Ethan had prevented Olivia from receiving timely medical care that might have saved her life, constituting the kind of deliberate action that French criminal law recognized as sufficient for murder prosecution, even if the initial assault had not been specifically intended to cause death. The perp walk that brought Ethan from police headquarters to preliminary hearings became an international media spectacle, with dozens of cameras capturing the handcuffed influencer, whose millions of followers were now divided between those insisting on his innocence and those horrified by emerging evidence contradicting his carefully constructed public persona. Ethan's attempt to hide his face from photographers and his hunched posture contrasted dramatically with the confident, charismatic personality he had always projected in content, revealing someone whose self-assurance depended entirely on controlling how he was filmed and edited, someone who could not maintain his performance when cameras captured reality, rather than curated fiction designed to generate engagement and preserve illusions that benefited him financially and emotionally. The assignment of defense attorneys to Ethan's case proved challenging, as several prominent lawyers declined representation after reviewing preliminary evidence and recognizing that defending him would damage their own reputations. Given the likelihood that recovered video footage would eventually be leaked or presented in ways that made Ethan appear unsympathetically violent and manipulative, the legal team that ultimately agreed to represent him developed a strategy focused on portraying Olivia's death as a tragic accident, resulting from an unfortunate combination of heated argument, unfortunate positioning near stairs, and Ethan's clumsy attempt to prevent her from leaving, that resulted in the fall he had consistently described, despite forensic evidence, systematically dismantling every element of his narrative. The forensic video analysis presented to investigating magistrates revealed the recovered footage in devastating detail, showing the progression from argument to assault with clarity that eliminated any possibility of claiming accidental death or self-defense. The video showed Ethan grabbing Olivia forcefully when she attempted to walk away from their argument, slamming her against a wall, while screaming about her selfishness and lack of appreciation for everything he had done to make her famous, and then pursuing her to the staircase, where the fatal confrontation occurred largely off-camera, but with audio clearly capturing Olivia's screams, the sound of impact, and Ethan's immediate panicked realization that he had seriously injured or killed her, followed by his calculating decision to delete footage before seeking help or calling emergency services. The testimony from former video editor Lila Chen provided crucial insight into Ethan's true personality and his systematic deception of his audience through careful editing that removed any indication of his controlling behavior, volatile temper. Lila described witnessing multiple incidents where Ethan berated Olivia between takes, demanded she reshoot segments until her emotional presentation matched his vision regardless of how exhausted or upset she was, and made threats about replacing her with other female collaborators if she could not maintain the performance standards their audience expected. Lila had quit her position 3 months before Olivia's death, after discovering raw footage of Ethan physically pushing Olivia during an argument, feeling morally unable to continue helping him maintain deceptions. That concealed behavior she recognized as abusive and potentially dangerous. The examination of Olivia's final weeks through her private digital communications revealed increasing desperation and fear as she recognized that her situation was deteriorating and that Ethan's violence was escalating beyond the psychological abuse and occasional physical aggression she had previously endured. Messages to Sophie described Ethan's rage about declining engagement metrics and his accusations that Olivia was not trying hard enough to maintain audience interest, his threats to divorce her and destroy her reputation by portraying her as mentally unstable if she disclosed anything about their private difficulties, and her own confusion about whether she was actually at fault for their problems, or whether Ethan's perspective was distorted in ways that made her responsible for circumstances he controlled completely through his manipulation and demands. The financial investigation revealed that Ethan had systematically controlled all income from their joint content, depositing sponsorship payments and advertising revenue into business accounts, where Olivia had no access despite appearing equally in the content that generated these earnings. Bank records showed that Olivia received only a small monthly allowance for personal expenses, while Ethan spent freely on equipment, travel, and luxury items he featured in content, creating financial dependence that made leaving practically impossible for someone who had abandoned her fashion design career to become full-time content creator without developing independent income sources or maintaining the professional relationships that might have provided employment alternatives if she had attempted to escape. The psychiatric evaluation ordered by investigating magistrates concluded that Ethan displayed significant narcissistic personality traits, including grandiose self-image, need for constant admiration, lack of empathy for others, and tendency to view people instrumentally as means of achieving his goals rather than as individuals deserving respect and autonomy. The psychologist report noted that Ethan's obsession with social media metrics and audience perception suggested his self-worth was pathologically dependent on external validation, making him particularly volatile when threatened with exposure or when performance metrics suggested declining popularity that might undermine the image he had constructed and the lifestyle it enabled financially and emotionally. The investigation into Ethan's pre-marriage relationship history revealed a disturbing pattern of escalating control and manipulation across multiple relationships. with each successive girlfriend describing more restrictive and psychologically damaging behavior that suggested Ethan was becoming increasingly bold about his abuse as his fame and financial success grew and reinforced his belief that his social media influence made him effectively immune from accountability. Former partners described Ethan's evolution from initially charming suitor to demanding controller who monitored their movements, criticized their appearance and behavior constantly, and threatened to use his platform to destroy them if they disclosed unflattering information or challenged his dominance in ways that threatened his carefully constructed public persona. The autopsy findings presented to magistrates definitively established that Olivia's injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall and instead indicated sustained physical assault, followed by fatal impact, likely caused by her head being forcibly driven into marble flooring, with significant force applied by another person. The medical examiner documented defensive wounds, bruising patterns consistent with being grabbed and restrained, and the specific nature of skull fractures that could not have resulted from the fall Ethan described, but instead required the kind of focused, violent impact that suggested rage-driven assault rather than accident or even impulsive push that might have constituted manslaughter rather than murder. The digital forensics examination of Ethan's search history in the weeks before Olivia's death revealed disturbing queries, including how to explain injuries to authorities, whether French domestic violence laws applied to foreign nationals, what penalties existed for spousal abuse, and various terms related to accidental death, and how suspicions could be avoided if something happened to a spouse during an argument. This search history suggested premeditation, or at minimum awareness, that his escalating violence might eventually cause serious harm, requiring explanations to authorities, demonstrating consciousness of guilt that undermined defense claims that Olivia's death was completely unexpected and accidental, rather than a foreseeable result of Ethan's pattern of escalating abuse. The public reaction to Ethan's arrest divided sharply between his loyal fan base, who refused to believe their favorite creator capable of the violence evidence suggested, and others horrified by the disconnect between Ethan's curated online persona and the reality revealed through investigation. The hashtag campaigns that emerged included both support for Ethan from followers, convinced he was being falsely accused, and justice demands from those who recognized Olivia as a victim whose story had been manipulated and controlled, even after her death, by someone who viewed her primarily as content rather than as a person deserving respect and safety. The social media debates about the case revealed broader concerns about parasocial relationships where audiences felt they knew creators intimately, despite seeing only carefully curated performances designed to generate engagement rather than authentic connection. The preliminary hearings in French court established the framework for prosecution theories about Ethan's guilt, while also revealing defense strategies that would attempt to minimize his responsibility by claiming that whatever violence occurred had been provoked by Olivia's emotional instability and that her death resulted from tragic accident rather than deliberate assault requiring murder conviction. The examining magistrate's decision to upgrade charges from manslaughter to murder reflected the accumulating evidence that Ethan had demonstrated consciousness of guilt through his attempts to delete incriminating footage and his delay in seeking medical help, suggesting awareness that his actions had been criminal rather than the immediate emergency response that would be expected from someone whose spouse had truly been injured accidentally. The testimony from Rachel Carter, Olivia's mother, who had flown to Paris immediately upon learning of her daughter's death, provided devastating emotional impact as she described the transformation she had witnessed in Olivia following her marriage to Ethan. Rachel testified that her vibrant, creative daughter had gradually become anxious and deferential, apologizing constantly and seeming afraid to make even minor decisions without checking with Ethan first, displaying classic signs of abuse that Rachel had tried to address during phone calls, only to have Olivia defend her husband and insist everything was wonderful, because admitting otherwise would require confronting terrifying reality that her supposedly perfect relationship was actually a nightmare she felt powerless to escape. The presentation of video evidence to the court represented the prosecution's most powerful argument, with recovered footage showing Ethan's transformation from the charming persona his audience knew to the violent abuser he became when he believed cameras were off or forgot they were recording. The footage shown in preliminary hearings included only selected portions deemed necessary for establishing probable cause, with the most graphic content of the actual fatal assault withheld pending full trial. But even the limited clips revealed Ethan screaming at Olivia with shocking intensity, grabbing her forcefully enough to leave visible marks, and making explicit threats about what he would do to her reputation if she ever tried to leave him or reveal the truth about their relationship. The defense's attempt to introduce evidence about Olivia's alleged emotional difficulties was partially successful, with the court allowing testimony that she had struggled with anxiety and depression while restricting evidence that might unfairly blame the victim for her own death or suggest she had somehow provoked violence that resulted in her murder. The defense presented text messages where Olivia expressed feeling overwhelmed by their content schedule and exhausted by constant filming, which defense attorneys claimed demonstrated emotional instability rather than reasonable response to Ethan's unrealistic demands and controlling behavior that would exhaust and destabilize anyone subjected to such comprehensive manipulation and surveillance. The forensic timeline presented by prosecutors established that Ethan had spent approximately 19 minutes reviewing and deleting video footage before finally calling emergency services, a delay that medical experts testified might have cost Olivia her life by preventing timely treatment that could potentially have saved her if paramedics had arrived during the critical window when intervention might have prevented fatal progression of her head injuries. This evidence supported upgraded murder charges by demonstrating that even if the initial assault could be characterized as impulsive rather than premeditated, Ethan's deliberate choice to prioritize evidence, destruction, over seeking help for his dying wife constituted the kind of calculated action that French law recognized as sufficient for murder prosecution. The testimony from police officers who responded to Ethan's emergency call described his demeanor as theatrical and performative, rather than genuinely distressed, with one veteran officer noting that Ethan seemed more concerned about controlling how he appeared to first responders than about his wife's condition. Officers testified that Ethan had insisted on explaining what happened before, allowing them to fully assess Olivia's injuries, providing a detailed narrative clearly designed to establish his preferred version of events before authorities could develop alternative theories based on physical evidence and forensic analysis that would systematically dismantle every element of his carefully crafted story. The examination of Ethan's immediate actions following Olivia's death revealed calculated attempts to shape public narrative through social media before authorities could establish control over information flow. Within hours of her death, and while still being questioned by police, Ethan had been communicating with his management team about timing and content of the statement he would post to his channel, discussing how to generate maximum sympathy while preempting alternative narratives that might emerge as investigation proceeded and evidence became public. These communications revealed someone thinking strategically about reputation management rather than genuinely grieving his wife's death, someone whose primary concern was preserving his brand and income rather than mourning the loss of the woman he claimed to have loved completely. The investigation into Ethan's financial situation revealed that he had been experiencing significant stress about declining engagement metrics and competition from newer creators, with internal messages to his team expressing anxiety that his audience might be losing interest and that he needed to develop more compelling content to maintain his lifestyle and income that depended entirely on sustained audience, attention, and brand partnerships. This financial pressure provided potential motive for Ethan's increasingly volatile behavior in the weeks before Olivia's death, as he blamed her for not trying hard enough to maintain audience engagement and accused her of being selfish for wanting breaks from constant filming when their financial security depended on maintaining consistent content schedule, regardless of personal exhaustion or emotional well-being. The testimony from brand partnership managers revealed that several major sponsors had been considering terminating their relationships with Ethan due to concerns about authenticity and audience perception that engagement seemed forced rather than genuine, representing significant financial threat that might have motivated Ethan's increasingly desperate and controlling behavior toward Olivia in the weeks before her death. These corporate contacts described Ethan as difficult to work with and obsessed with metrics to unhealthy degree, someone who viewed every aspect of his life instrumentally, in terms of how it could generate content and revenue, rather than having any genuine interests or relationships outside of his online persona. The psychiatric testimony about narcissistic personality disorder helped contextualize Ethan's behavior while avoiding excusing it, with expert witnesses explaining how individuals with extreme narcissistic traits experienced perceived criticism or abandonment as existential threats requiring defensive aggression to protect fragile self-image that depended entirely on external validation and controlling how others perceived them. The psychologist testified that Ethan's entire identity appeared constructed around his online persona, and that threats to this constructed image through declining metrics or potential exposure of his abusive behavior would trigger panic and rage in someone whose self-worth depended pathologically on maintaining illusions that reality increasingly threatened to expose. The social media analysis presented to the court revealed the extent to which Ethan had manipulated Olivia's online presence, controlling what she could post to her personal accounts and requiring her to maintain enthusiastic support for their relationship brand, even during periods when she was clearly suffering from his abuse and desperately wanting to escape. Digital forensics showed that Ethan had access to all Olivia's social media passwords and had edited or deleted posts he deemed off-brand, sometimes even posting content to her accounts himself to maintain the illusion of her enthusiastic participation in their relationship when she was actually too exhausted or distressed to maintain the performance he demanded, constantly. The testimony from Sophie Martin about the changes she witnessed in Olivia following her marriage was particularly impactful, with Sophie describing specific incidents where Olivia had appeared with bruises she explained unconvincingly as clumsiness, where she had canceled long-planned meetings at the last minute with vague excuses that suggested Ethan had forbidden her attendance, and where she had seemed increasingly anxious and defeated, rather than displaying the confident creativity that had defined her personality before. Ethan systematically diminished her through constant criticism and control that left her doubting her own perceptions and abilities. The full criminal trial of Ethan Cole began in April 2024 at the Paris courthouse, attracting international media attention unprecedented for a domestic violence case due to Ethan's fame and the digital evidence that provided unusually comprehensive documentation of the abuse leading to Olivia's murder. The courtroom was packed with journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and members of domestic violence advocacy organizations who viewed the case as symbolizing broader issues about how social media enabled abusers to hide systematic violence behind carefully curated facades while their victims suffered in silence for fear of retaliation through platforms their abusers controlled and audiences their abusers could weaponize through selective narrative manipulation. The opening statement from lead prosecutor Marie Dubois emphasized the calculated nature of Ethan's abuse and the comprehensive evidence documenting his systematic control over every aspect of Olivia's life, from her finances to her communications to her physical movements that he monitored through tracking software and constant surveillance that extended even to hidden cameras Olivia did not know existed. Dubois described Ethan as someone who viewed his wife primarily as content and revenue generator, rather than as a person deserving respect and autonomy, someone whose narcissistic need for control and validation made him increasingly dangerous, as stress mounted about maintaining the illusion that sustained his lifestyle and self-image. The defense opening statement attempted to reframe the narrative by portraying Ethan as a flawed but loving husband, whose relationship difficulties with an emotionally unstable wife had tragically culminated in an accident that he deeply regretted, but had not intended or foreseen, despite his inappropriate behavior during their final argument. Defense attorney Philippe Rousseau acknowledged that Ethan had been controlling and psychologically manipulative, but insisted this did not make him a murderer, arguing that whatever physical contact occurred during their argument had been impulsive reaction during heated confrontation rather than deliberate assault intended to cause the fatal injuries that resulted from unfortunate combination of circumstances, including the marble flooring and Olivia's positioning near stairs, when their argument escalated beyond verbal conflict. The presentation of video evidence dominated the trial's early phases, with prosecutors methodically introducing recovered footage that documented the systematic abuse Olivia endured and the fatal assault that ended her life. The most devastating evidence was the recovered video from the morning of her death, showing with horrifying clarity how Ethan's rage escalated from verbal abuse to physical violence and culminating in the fatal moment when audio captured Olivia's final screams and the impact that caused her fatal injuries while Ethan's camera continued recording from its forgotten position on a nearby tripod. The courtroom reactions to this footage were visceral, with several jurors visibly distressed, and Olivia's mother leaving the room in tears while Ethan sat emotionless at the defense table, displaying the same flat affect that investigators had noted during his initial questioning, when normal grief responses would have been expected from someone who had genuinely loved his deceased wife. The forensic pathologist's testimony provided technical detail about Olivia's injuries and their causation, with Dr. Laurent Mercier explaining that the pattern of skull fractures, brain trauma, and defensive wounds were completely inconsistent with simple fall and instead indicated sustained assault followed by fatal impact, likely caused by Ethan forcibly driving Olivia's head into marble flooring with substantial force, applied deliberately rather than accidentally. Mercier's testimony included graphic autopsy photographs and detailed analysis that left no reasonable doubt about the violent nature of Olivia's death, systematically dismantling every element of Ethan's accident narrative while establishing that her injuries required the kind of deliberate force that could only result from intentional assault rather than any plausible accident. Scenario: the testimony from Lila Chen about her experiences working as Ethan's video editor provided crucial insight into his true personality and the calculated nature of his public deception. Lila described witnessing Ethan's transformation between takes from screaming abuser to charming romantic partner, the meticulous editing process that removed any indication of his controlling behavior or Olivia's genuine distress, and the specific incident that prompted her resignation when she discovered raw footage of Ethan pushing Olivia forcefully during an argument, while immediately afterward filming a cheerful segment about their wonderful day together. Lila's testimony revealed the extent to which Ethan's entire online presence was manufactured deception designed to generate revenue while concealing systematic abuse that would have immediately destroyed his career and income if his audience had any awareness of his true character. The digital forensics testimony revealed the sophistication of Ethan's surveillance and control systems, with investigators documenting tracking software on Olivia's devices, hidden cameras throughout their apartment, and comprehensive monitoring of her communications that extended to accessing her private messages and emails without her knowledge or consent. The forensic expert testified that Ethan had been obsessively documenting and controlling every aspect of Olivia's life, maintaining detailed logs of her movements and activities that suggested profound distrust and need for absolute control that characterized the most dangerous types of domestic abusers who viewed their partners as property rather than autonomous individuals deserving privacy and respect. The testimony from Rachel Carter represented the emotional climax of the prosecution's case, with Olivia's mother directly confronting Ethan from the witness stand and demanding he look at her while she described the daughter he had killed and the future he had stolen through his violence and narcissistic obsession with control. Rachel's statement included reading excerpts from Olivia's secret video recording, where she expressed fear that Ethan might eventually kill her, her hope that someone would discover the truth if anything happened to her, and her love for her family. Despite the shame she felt about being trapped in an abusive marriage, she had been too afraid to disclose, while Ethan maintained complete control over how their relationship appeared to the world that trusted his carefully curated image. The defense presentation focused heavily on attempting to establish Olivia's alleged emotional instability and her role in provoking the argument that led to her death, though these efforts were repeatedly challenged by prosecutors who objected to victim-blaming tactics designed to minimize Ethan's responsibility for deliberately killing his wife. The defense called character witnesses who testified that Olivia could be moody and difficult, though cross-examination revealed that these behaviors emerged only after her marriage and represented normal responses to systematic abuse rather than inherent personality flaws that might somehow justify or explain Ethan's violence. The closing arguments brought all evidence together into competing narratives about whether Ethan should be convicted of intentional murder or lesser charges, acknowledging some degree of accident or provocation. Prosecutor Dubois emphasized the recovered video footage, the forensic evidence of sustained assault, and Ethan's calculated attempts to destroy evidence and control narrative rather than immediately seeking help for his dying wife. She argued that Ethan's actions before, during, and after Olivia's death demonstrated consciousness of guilt and deliberate choice rather than tragic accident, and that his systematic abuse and escalating violence made Olivia's death a foreseeable result of his dangerous behavior that he had chosen to continue despite multiple opportunities to seek help or allow Olivia to safely leave their toxic relationship. Defense attorney Rousseau's closing emphasized the lack of direct premeditation and asked jurors to consider whether the evidence truly proved Ethan intended to kill Olivia rather than simply engaging in the kind of regrettable physical confrontation that sometimes occurred during heated arguments between couples. Rousseau acknowledged Ethan's controlling behavior was wrong but insisted this did not make him a murderer, arguing that the prosecution had failed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that Ethan specifically intended the fatal injuries that resulted from their confrontation rather than acting impulsively during an argument that tragically escalated beyond what either party anticipated or desired. The jury deliberation extended over 6 days as 12 French citizens wrestled with complex questions about intention, control, and criminal responsibility in cases where systematic abuse culminated in death that might have elements of both deliberate assault and tragic accident. The deliberation room discussions revealed tensions between jurors who emphasized Ethan's pattern of escalating violence and those who questioned whether the evidence truly proved he intended to kill Olivia rather than simply losing control during an argument in ways that were criminal but potentially not rising to the level of intentional murder, requiring life imprisonment. The verdict announcement on June 7, 2024, brought a hushed courtroom to complete silence as the jury foreman stood to deliver decisions that would determine whether Ethan Cole would spend the rest of his life imprisoned for murder or receive lesser sentence, acknowledging some degree of accident or mitigation in circumstances leading to Olivia Carter's death. The reading of guilty on charges of voluntary homicide with aggravating circumstances brought immediate emotional reactions from both families, with Rachel Carter collapsing in tears of relief, while Ethan showed no visible response to the conviction that would result in mandatory life imprisonment with minimum 22 years before parole eligibility under French criminal law applicable to domestic violence murders committed with particular cruelty or premeditation. The sentencing hearing that followed included victim impact statements from Olivia's family, describing the permanent devastation Ethan's violence had inflicted on everyone who loved her, emphasizing that he had stolen not only Olivia's life but also the future children she might have had, the career she might have built, and the happiness she deserved after escaping the nightmare he had systematically created through manipulation, control, and escalating abuse that culminated in murder. The statements emphasized that Ethan's punishment should reflect not only the fatal assault but also the comprehensive psychological torture he had inflicted throughout their relationship, while maintaining public facade that deceived millions and prevented Olivia from accessing help that might have saved her life. The court's final sentence of life imprisonment, with minimum 22 years, reflected the severity of Ethan's crimes and the aggravating factors including his abuse of power, systematic manipulation, attempts to destroy evidence, and complete absence of genuine remorse for killing someone he claimed to have loved. The judge's statement accompanying the sentence condemned Ethan's exploitation of social media to conceal abuse and control narrative, noting that his case represented a disturbing example of how digital platforms could enable predators to hide systematic violence behind carefully curated content, while their victims suffered in silence for fear of retaliation through audiences their abusers could weaponize through selective storytelling and manufactured sympathy. The immediate shutdown of Ethan's social media accounts and the permanent deletion of his content by platforms responding to public pressure represented symbolic justice for Olivia, ensuring that Ethan could no longer profit from the illusion he had maintained while systematically abusing and ultimately murdering his wife. The digital erasure of his carefully constructed online presence destroyed the legacy he had valued above Olivia's life, leaving him with nothing but decades of imprisonment to contemplate the violence that had destroyed multiple lives while generating temporary fame and wealth that ultimately meant nothing when confronted with consequences of his actions. The advocacy work that emerged from Olivia's case included legislative efforts to strengthen protections for domestic violence victims in social media relationships, enhanced training for identifying abuse hidden behind curated online content, and support services specifically designed for individuals trapped in relationships where their abusers controlled digital narratives and weaponized social media platforms against anyone who might help them escape. Rachel Carter became prominent advocate for these initiatives, channeling her grief into work that might prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies by raising awareness about how digital fame and parasocial relationships could enable and conceal abuse. The broader cultural impact of the case included important conversations about authenticity in social media, the dangers of parasocial relationships where audiences felt they knew creators whose carefully edited content revealed nothing about their true characters, and the responsibility of platforms to develop better systems for identifying and addressing abuse perpetrated through their services. The case prompted some platforms to implement enhanced reporting systems and to provide resources for victims of intimate partner violence who were being controlled or monitored through digital means by abusers who used technology to maintain surveillance and enforce isolation. The lasting legacy of Olivia Carter lives on through the thousands of domestic violence victims who found courage to seek help after learning her story, the legislative changes that strengthened protections and support services, and the permanent reminder that social media perfection often conceals devastating reality, requiring skepticism and awareness from audiences who might otherwise believe manufactured narratives designed to deceive rather than inform. Her death ultimately meant something beyond senseless tragedy, transformed through her mother's advocacy and public awareness into catalyst for changes that continue protecting vulnerable individuals from predators who exploit digital platforms to facilitate control, manipulation, and violence, while maintaining public images that bear no resemblance to the monsters they become when cameras stop rolling and carefully constructed facades crumble to reveal terrifying truth beneath surface perfection.